Can one play or listen to music during the period of Sfirat HaOmer?
This halakha, or minhag more correctly, appears in the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Haim Siman Tau Sadi Gimel. The Tur writes as follows: Nohagim b'chol ha'mekomot. He begins by saying that this is the minhag, this is the custom in all places, that is to say in all Jewish communities. Shelo lisa isha, not to marry a woman, ben Pesach la'aseret, between Pesach and Shavuot. That is all the Torah says in the opening statement. He speaks therefore only about marriages, which are obviously a very joyous occasion. Later he adds, "V'yesh mekomot shenahu shelo listaper," and there are places, there are communities where the practice is, the custom is also, in addition to the first issue that was mentioned, marriages, it is also the custom not to cut one's hair or trim one's beard during that same period. The first thing to note, therefore, is that we are discussing a minhag and not a halakha, not a din. That is why the Torah uses the language noharim. This is the practice, this is the custom. Another point to mention is that the Torah states that this is the custom in all Jewish communities. In point of fact, this statement is not accurate. It was surely the case that in all parts of the Jewish world with which the Torah Ben Yaakov Ba'al Turim was familiar, this was apparently the practice. But we know for a fact that there were communities in different parts of the world where this was not the case. First of all, we have the testimony of the Radbaz, Rabbi David Ben Zimra, in his Teshuvah in Helek Beth Tauresh Pezain, where he states explicitly that he was familiar with communities where the practice, this entire practice, this custom was unknown and was not observed at all. And he is referring there to cutting hair in actual fact, but very likely also with regards to marriage, but certainly with regards to cutting hair, he says there was no such custom at all in certain places with which he was personally familiar. I can add to that I, on more than one occasion, spoke to some Temani, Yemenite Jews, including particularly older individuals who remembered what was customary in Teman, in Yemen, when they were growing up. We're talking about 70 years ago, 80 years ago, and they report that at least many of the Jews, perhaps not all, they said to me, but many of the Jews in Teman did not observe this custom at all. So this was a widespread custom, and is today, certainly, but it was not a custom that all of Am Yisrael accepted. That is an important point to note. The next thing to note is that none of the sources, not the Torah that we just mentioned, not the Shulchan Aruch who quotes the Torah word for word, not any other sources from the early authorities, make any mention at all of music, playing music or listening to music. This is not mentioned anywhere at all. The two things that are mentioned are those that we mentioned a moment ago: marriage and cutting hair, trimming the beard, etc. With regards to marriage, it is noted by all the poskim, all the sifrei halacha that mention this practice, that the minhag applies to marriage but not to getting engaged. In the words of the Torah, it says, he quotes Rabbi Yitzhak Giat, a well-known early authority from the end of the time of the Geonim, or just immediately after that. He says, Daukani So'im. This applies, this refers only to the actual marriage itself, which is a great celebration. Shuhu Ikar Simha. But, Aval La'ares Ulekadesh Shapir Dameh. However, to engage, to become engaged to a woman, to betroth a woman, we could say, as was once done. The process of getting married was once done in a two-stage process. First the erusin and then the kiddushin. In other words, the woman was already betrothed and already had the status of a married woman for almost all intents and purposes from the time of the betrothal, which could frequently be quite some time, sometimes a year, and sometimes even more perhaps, and sometimes less, but certainly a long period before the actual marriage, the huppah, etc. What we see from this statement, which is also quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, is that even the celebration of something which is quite a joyous occasion, despite the fact that it's not a marriage, but it is an engagement, a celebration of an engagement of a couple, even such a thing as that is permitted during Sefirat HaOmer, because it is not considered a very great celebration. It is a joyous occasion, but not on the same level as the wedding itself. And it is in connection with this statement, which appears in the Shulchan Aruch in Tau Tzadik Gimel, as we said, Seif Aleph. The Shulchan Aruch writes, La'ares or Lekadesh Shapir Dame, exactly the words of the Torah. The Magen Avraham, in his Perush, the beginning of this Siman, writes that during this period of Sefirat HaOmer, if one is getting engaged, one may make a Seudat Erusin, one may gather together friends and family and make a festive or celebratory meal on this occasion, which is something we do not do, for example, in the month of Av. So we see here also that the level, the severity of the avilut, of the mourning, of the sad nature of this period is less than that of the month of Av. So one is allowed, the Magen Avraham says, to make such a meal at the time of the erusin, of the engagement. Aval la'asot rikudim u'meholoth sharashuth, but to dance, which also implies music. Usually dancing does not take place unless there is music. But to dance, etc., sharashuth, which is something which is not required and not essential to the nature of the event, as opposed to what? As opposed to a wedding, for example, where the actual concept, the fact, the reality of music and dancing is considered to be a very important and essential part of a wedding and of the celebration of a wedding, as the Maharir writes in one of his Teshuvot. So with regards to the erusin, to the engagement, the Magen Avraham says dancing is not to be, he says, Naharula Esor, the custom is not to engage in such things. That is all that is said by the Magen Avraham. He's talking about dancing at an engagement party, at the celebration of an engagement. From this statement, certain Ahronim, certain Posekim, extrapolated and added to this and said that therefore the actual playing of music is also not allowed during Sefirat HaOmer. As we just mentioned, this was somehow understood or they saw it as implied in the fact that dancing is not allowed during this period. Now it's true, as we just mentioned, that dancing implies and assumes the playing of music. And it's also true that many generations ago, music was almost always associated with some joyous occasion, such as a marriage. Because after all, there were not many concerts at that time, and there were perhaps some in some parts of the world, but as a rule this was not the practice. Of course, recorded music did not exist, radios did not exist, music was always live, and it was usually reserved for particularly joyous occasions. So one can understand the connection being made by some authorities between music and dancing, because these things usually, almost without fail, went together. But of course we know that today this is not the case. Today, most of us are used to listening to and hearing music and playing music without any connection to any particularly joyous occasion. Some people learn to play instruments for recreation, for, one could say, for pleasure, but it doesn't translate into a particularly joyous or notable experience. It's something that people do on a regular basis. Many of us listen to music perhaps driving the car, or whilst doing things in the house, or cooking in the kitchen, or what have you. In other words, today, with the technological changes which have made it possible for some time now, for some generations already in fact, to hear music at almost any time, at any time of the day, and any day of the week, without any connection or context of a great celebration. Music today, in our experience, is a very different matter altogether. It's also relevant here, I think, to mention that which a friend of mine, a conversation that a friend of mine once had with the great Chacham by the name of Hagaon Rabbi Yisrael Fisher Zatzal, who was a well-known Haredi posek and Chacham in Yerushalayim, about a generation ago, something like that. He passed away. And my friend, when he was a young yeshiva student, spoke to him about a number of issues, and one of them was this issue of playing music or listening to music during Sefirat Omer, during the 3 weeks. And Hagaon Rav Fisher said to him as follows. He said, today, people from an emotional, psychological point of view, many people need music. They are used to hearing music, and not hearing music to them is a very great burden, and something which weighs heavily upon them, which is not true, which was not the case some generations ago, when music was always associated with a celebration, with dancing, with a wedding, etc. Today, he said, people hear music a lot, and it is part of their, it is needed for part of their, as part of their normal course of living life, in order to maintain a certain psychological, emotional equilibrium. And therefore, he said, he did not believe that this idea, this practice of listening to or playing music during Sefirat HaOmer and the 3 weeks, he did not feel that this was necessary or obligatory nowadays. And I would definitely agree with this statement. I would just add that the entire basis for this widely assumed practice and widely held concept of not listening and not playing music during these days of Sefirat HaOmer really is based on a number of steps which are not at all, do not flow inexorably from the sources at all. As we mentioned, the sources speak about not getting married and not cutting one's hair or trimming one's beard. And there is a distinction made between a marriage and an engagement. And then the Magen Avraham states that if it's an engagement party, one can have a meal and celebrate, but without dancing. We still haven't heard a word, even a hint of anything to do with music by itself, not in the context of any kind of celebration or playing music. And therefore, this at best can be seen as being an assumption on the part of certain authorities, because in their time, in their place, music was always associated with a celebration such as a marriage. Today this is not the case. And therefore, because this is a minhag, and it's not a minhag that was accepted even by all of Am Yisrael, as we mentioned, and it is not a minhag which a source for which, with regards to music, is not a minhag that one can find a source for in any early sources, not even really in more recent sources, up to much closer to our time, as we explained. Therefore, in my view, one may play and one may listen to music during Sefirat HaOmer.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.